What is going on, everybody? My name is Mark and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel for the first time. If you clicked into this video, then you are watching a video on 3D printing an inventory item known none other than the Hylian Shield from The Legend of Zelda. Now, this is something that I have had in development for quite some time, so I certainly am excited to be releasing this to all of you. And, as always, if anyone is interested in printing one of these shields to add to their own collection, I have included a link in the description where it can be downloaded. Also, the best part of that is the STL files are absolutely free. So happy printing, everyone. And speaking of free, the Zelda-themed music that you're listening to comes from two different channels that have composed this copyright-free music, which I have also annotated in the description for anyone that's interested in just listening to it. But I would like to personally give a shout out to these channels, the Accordion Guy and CrispyDonut, for creating this amazing royalty-free content. This video just wouldn't feel right without it. So moving on, I'd like to go ahead and shift your attention over to the top left-hand side of the screen for just a moment. If you've taken notice, this shield is broken up into 9 separate sections, and that's not including the handle or the strap mounts. So in other words, this print was massive and undoubtedly my largest print to date. If my memory serves me well, I want to say that I used roughly 3.5 rolls of filament respectively. Some of the larger sections took roughly 2 days to print, so between a couple of print fails along the way and everyday life stalling my progress, I was able to get this printed in approximately 2 weeks or so. Also keep in mind, I printed smaller projects in between 4 previous videos that I've released, such as Bangalore's Heirloom from Apex Legends or the Pokemon Legends Arceus Pokeball. So that's just how long this video has been in development for. In retrospect, a second 3D printer would have certainly sped things up, but no worries, that is something that I am currently working on saving up for through commissions. And speaking of commissions, I want to go ahead and provide a sneak peek of my next video, which will be the EE3 MK2 blaster, which is most popularly used by Boba Fett. This commission comes from someone that I know personally, and as he described it, this is a grail item to him, so I can't wait to finish it and deliver it to him. But since I had already made 3 separate videos covering making Boba Fett's helmet, I figured this commission would be a perfect opportunity to continue this bounty hunter kick that I've been on lately. So if you're interested in seeing that video when it comes out, go ahead and hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when I release it. And who knows, I may eventually build a playlist of me printing the rest of Boba Fett's armor as well. The possibilities are endless. But that does wrap up the 3D printing portion of this video, so let's go ahead and move on to post-processing. Like many of my projects, I started with some general assembly of the model, which required some pretty rough sandpaper, alignment pegs that are included in the downloads for this model, and my favorite adhesive of choice, which is Bob Smith Industries 5-minute epoxy. In previous videos, I have used JB Weld's 5-minute epoxy, but the Bob Smith Industries variant tends to set up just a tad bit faster. Either way, they're both designed to accomplish the same goal, so for this I'll leave the choice up to the discretion of the viewer. Moving on, it's best to scuff the areas that will be adhered to each other with a sandpaper that is exceptionally coarse. For this, I recommend 80 grit sandpaper or less. By doing this, you're creating tiny grooves for the adhesive to sink into, which decreases the possibility of seam failure over time, because though something quick setting like superglue may hold well in the beginning, as the model is moved around and handled by your fellow colleagues, friends, or family, it may begin to fall apart on you. Furthermore, superglue is more brittle than 5-minute epoxy, so it is more prone to cracking. Now let's take a minute to talk about the order in which I assembled the shield. Since the shield is broken up into 9 separate sections, I first assembled 3 vertical rows of 3, allowing 24 hours to pass for the 5-minute epoxy to completely cure. For those who aren't aware, 5-minute epoxy is just the working time, but on the fine print of the packaging it suggests that you should wait up to 24 hours for it to fully cure. Once that time passed, I followed up by adhering the 2 vertical rows together, and once again I waited an additional 24 hours for the 5-minute epoxy to fully cure. In doing this, I also ensured that not only the mating surfaces were epoxied, but also the alignment pegs on both ends as well. With that being said, I do recommend scuffing the inside of the alignment holes in tandem with the alignment pegs. Also, if you can help it, this model will not fit together 100% perfectly, so try to fill in any remaining gaps with epoxy along the way. Even though the remaining seams will be later filled in with a putty such as Bondo body filler or glazing spot putty, seams like this are likely to flex. An adhesive would actually hold this together, whereas a putty would not. To begin smoothing this print, I'll typically begin with rough sanding the entire surface of the model with 80 grit sandpaper. The goal here is not to completely wipe away every single layer line, but rather to aim for a majority of them. Anything that is missed the first time around will be filled in with either 2-in-1 sandable filler primer or glazing spot putty. Then once that cures, the model will need to be sanded again, but with a finer grit of sandpaper. You'll later notice that this is a process that is repeated several times throughout this video, and for that matter, could be repeated indefinitely. I'm certain that I've mentioned this in every single video thus far, but for the amount of time that you spend sanding, spraying, puttying, and repeating greatly depends on how perfect you want your model to be. Personally, I won't pull my hair out over a few little nicks and dents that are left behind. I would rather embrace them and paint it up and make it look like it's slightly worn or quote-unquote battle damaged. And I know this is just my opinion, but small details like that do add a little bit of character to the final product, so it's not necessarily a bad thing to leave behind a few imperfections here and there. However many times that you decide to repeat this phase of production, it is recommended that you sand the primer coat and spot putty with a finer grit of sandpaper than 80 grit. Personally, I think that 320 grit is perfect for this, as it does leave the surface of what you're working on feeling exceptionally smooth, yet if you were to move away from primer and move on to painting, you shouldn't have any issues with the paint peeling off of your model during a tape pull, for example. Unlike sanding with 80 grit sandpaper, I find that 320 grit is much more pleasant to work with, as it's not as coarse on your skin while holding it, and you don't have to apply nearly as much pressure when sanding. This is primarily because when sanding with 80 grit sandpaper, you're essentially sanding through raw plastic, and if you're printing on PLA as opposed to PETG filament, it's even more difficult to sand. By the time that you arrive at 320 grit, you're really just filing down excess primer and spot putty, which is a significantly softer material. I would like to note that for a model such as this, where there aren't ultra fine details, it is okay to overspray a tad bit with primer in an effort to fill in remaining layer lines. Just remember that it can always be sanded away. Also, if you clog up crevices with too much primer that are hard to get to with sandpaper, usually a metal pick can be used to scrape those areas out. Now for a moment, I would like to shift focus onto the back side of the shield, as one of the biggest challenges of this project that I faced was figuring out how to mount the shield handle and strap mounts. I didn't want to simply run screws into the plastic, as the hole would eventually wallow out due to excessive handling, and I certainly didn't want to just epoxy everything together, as that would be an undeniable recipe for disaster. So here's what I came up with. I drilled holes wide enough to set plastic drywall anchors into, and then 5-minute epoxy those into place. That way, if anything ever goes wrong with the mounting hole, replacing the screw anchor should resolve the issue. To end this continuous loop, I don't recommend a final primer coat, as that would just make your model feel rough in certain spots due to overspray. Instead, wrap things up with a final once over with some 320 grit sandpaper, and wipe down your model with a damp paper towel to remove any residual dust. And when you're ready, you can move on to spraying your base coat. For this project, I decided to go with a gloss black spray paint for my base coat. I've come to find that metallic finish on top of high gloss as opposed to satin or semi-gloss tends to come out more reflective. Also, be mindful of what you're setting your model on while spraying, because I had a slight issue with the plastic drop cloth sticking to the underside of the shield and had to sand away unwanted residual paint once I flipped it over. In previous videos, I've used graphite powder as a method for establishing a metallic finish, but for the sake of convenience alone in this project, I decided to go with Rustoleum Metallic Finish spray paint. Although for smaller projects, I will continue using graphite powder as the results with that method are undeniably convincing. Now that we've arrived at the masking portion of this video, things start to get fun because this is the last preparation step. Finally, things will start picking up speed as this project starts coming to life. The first coat that I applied after masking was a blue metallic finish, which is made by Rustoleum. I did like how this blue came out, but I can't help but wonder how this would have looked if I had used a blue translucent tint on top of the already present metallic finish, as opposed to the opaque blue that I used with metallic flakes mixed in. The next two sections of this project were hand painted, and the reason for this is that although I am certain that I could have very cleanly taped up and isolated specific parts of this shield just to airbrush them and have to repeat the process over again, I figured that I could get this done faster by just brushing the red and gold on by hand. Now yes, you will be able to see brush strokes, but like I said earlier in the video, I won't pull my hair out over small imperfections like that. They give it character, and no matter what, this project is still going to look good in the end. Also, if anyone wants to use the specific paint numbers that I used, I made sure to annotate those details in the description below. I know that for many viewers, these videos serve as just a form of entertainment, but for those that are seeking a tutorial, I want to give you the tools to succeed, or I at least want to try to. This is a hobby that I'm pretty much self-taught in, and when I was learning a lot of the techniques that I use in my videos, I had to go through a plethora of content to figure out this stuff. That's why I'm as detailed in explaining things as I am in each video, and I know that I say this in every video, but I really do want to encourage you to get out there and make some kick-ass cosplay props and show it off to your friends, family, and fellow cosplayers. So to bring you back up to speed, the patterns that I'm tracing onto this wood veneer are made from heavyweight cardstock. I kind of just made them through tracing the shapes off of the backside of the shield. The good thing is that you only have to make one template for each of the shapes, since the shapes mirror each other. Later on, these wood veneer cutouts will be glued to the backside of the shield. Another detail that I wanted to add to this project was to the handle on the backside of the shield. To give this a more period-accurate look, I decided to wrap the handle in twine. Prior to gluing this into place, I made sure to scuff the area that was going to be glued with 80 grit sandpaper. The super glue that I went with was Loctite super glue with gel control. The gel consistency glue is simply easier to work with, as opposed to working with a thinner viscosity adhesive. I would also like to say that I am very much pleased with how this handle came out, and I'm glad that I decided to go with twine. For the strap mounts that go onto the opposite end of the shield, closer to the forearm, they're designed to accept 3/4 inch wide strapping. The strapping material that I decided to go with was a dark brown leather. This setup was quite simple, as all I really had to do was measure the strapping specifically to my forearm, so somebody with a larger forearm probably isn't going to be able to wear it. But if I ever get to make this again for somebody else in a commission, I'll likely come up with something that is adjustable. Also, the roll of leather that I ordered was pretty cheap, and I have plenty of it to play around with. I may eventually just upgrade this strap for myself. However, this Hylian Shield is going to be spending a majority of its life as a wall prop, so I'm in no real hurry to make any further changes to it at this time. But if I eventually decide to do a Link cosplay, then that would warrant a change and I would go ahead and alter the strapping system on it. Shifting focus, we move on to gluing on the veneer that we cut out earlier. To begin this, it's very similar in how I sanded prior to gluing twine onto the handle. After those specified areas were hit with some 80 grit sandpaper, I went ahead and glued those sections onto the back of the shield with Titebond wood glue. Once I was certain that the wood glue had finally set, I went ahead and sprayed the back side of the shield with the same high gloss clear coat that I used on the front side of the shield, just to seal everything up. I waited at least 48 hours for the clear coat to cure before touching it with my bare hands so I wouldn't end up with fingerprints in my finish. Then I ran down a few screws just to get the strapping system installed on the back side of the shield, and that pretty much wrapped up my entire process for making this prop. So, if you truly like this content, I want you to hit that like button like you own it, hit the subscribe button, and then hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when I publish new content. I hope that everybody tunes in for the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.